Hey everyone, Elliot Voss is here, and let's jump into the first Reddit story. Am I overreacting because my girlfriend went to her ex-boyfriend's birthday party without telling me? I'm a 30-year-old guy and I've been dating my girlfriend, Madison, who's 28, for about 10 months. Honestly, things have been amazing. We get along incredibly well. We've even talked about renting a place together somewhere in San Diego next year. And until recently, we've never had any real problems. Last Saturday, she told me she was meeting a few old college friends in La Jolla. That sounded completely normal. I already had plans to watch a baseball game with my brother, so I wished her a good time and didn't think anything of it. The next morning, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw one of her friend's stories. It showed a group of people gathered around a cake with the caption, "Happy birthday, Tyler." The name immediately caught my attention because Tyler was Madison's ex. They dated for almost 3 years before breaking up about a year before she met me. She had always told me they weren't close anymore. According to her, they were simply friendly whenever they happened to see each other, nothing more. Later that evening, I casually asked her, "Hey, were you at Tyler's birthday?" She hesitated for a second before answering, "Yeah, it wasn't a big deal. A bunch of people were there." Then she quickly added, "I honestly didn't think it mattered." I stayed calm. I wasn't angry, and I wasn't accusing her of cheating. I simply told her, "I just wish you would have mentioned where you were actually going." Instead of understanding why that bothered me, she immediately became defensive. "You're making this into something it isn't. It was just a birthday. I wasn't hiding anything." But it kind of felt like she was. If she had simply said, "Hey, my old friend Tyler's having a birthday dinner and a few people from college invited me," I probably wouldn't have cared. Instead, she just said she was hanging out with college friends. Technically true, but it left out the most important part. Now I'm stuck wondering if she intentionally avoided mentioning his name because she knew I'd have questions. I'm not trying to control who she spends time with. People stay friends with exes all the time. But hiding information, even by leaving out details, feels different. So, am I overreacting? Personally, I don't think he is. Going to your ex's birthday isn't automatically a relationship-ending offense, but if you're in a serious relationship, telling your partner beforehand seems like basic respect. It's not about asking permission, it's about transparency. When you avoid mentioning something because you assume it'll create questions, it starts looking less like honesty and more like selective storytelling. Apparently, there were updates, so let's see what happened next. Later that evening, after reading a bunch of comments, I decided to bring it up one more time. Nothing dramatic, no yelling, no accusations. I simply told Madison that the birthday itself wasn't really the issue anymore. The issue was that she never told me where she was actually going. She sighed, rolled her eyes a little, and quietly said, "I just didn't want it to become a whole conversation." That answer honestly bothered me more than anything else she'd said. If you don't tell someone something because you don't want to deal with their reaction, doesn't that mean you already knew it was worth mentioning? The rest of that evening felt different. We watched a movie together, but neither of us was really paying attention. She kept checking her phone, and I kept replaying the conversation in my head. Eventually, she left earlier than usual. Nothing had exploded. Nobody slammed doors. Nobody yelled. But something definitely changed. I spent the rest of the night reading through the replies on my Reddit post. Most people weren't saying she cheated. Most of them were saying the same thing. The problem isn't the party. It's the lack of honesty. That stuck with me. Over the next week, we tried acting like everything was normal. We grabbed coffee in Pacific Beach. We had dinner together. We even spent Saturday walking along the waterfront. But every conversation somehow circled back to the same issue. Whenever I mentioned why it bothered me, she'd shrug. "It's not that serious. You're reading too much into it. You always overthink stuff." The more she dismissed my feelings, the less the birthday actually mattered. It became about communication. about whether we were building the kind of relationship where people told each other uncomfortable truths, or only the convenient ones. About 10 days later, we finally had another serious conversation. This time, she admitted something. I knew telling you beforehand would probably start a conversation I didn't want to have. There it was. Exactly what I had suspected. She wasn't hiding the party because something happened there. She hid it because avoiding the conversation felt easier. Ironically, that decision created a much bigger problem than simply telling me in advance ever would have. We sat in silence for a while. Finally, I said, I don't want to be with someone who feels like they have to leave things out just to keep the peace. She nodded. I guess we're just different. There wasn't any screaming, no dramatic breakup, no insults, just two people quietly realizing they expected different things from a relationship. We hugged goodbye. That was the last time we saw each other. Looking back now, I don't regret trusting my instincts. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't insecurity. It was the feeling that openness should never feel optional. If someone thinks honesty creates problems, eventually the lack of honesty creates even bigger ones. Sometimes a relationship doesn't end because of one mistake. Sometimes it ends because of how that mistake gets handled afterward. Honestly, I think they both learned something from the experience. She probably still believes the party itself wasn't a big deal. And honestly, she's probably right. But relationships aren't usually destroyed by one event. They're worn down by little moments where trust slowly disappears. Anyway, let's move on to another story. Am I wrong for telling my neighbor to stop complaining about my house? About a year ago, I bought my first home in a neighborhood outside Sacramento. One of the reasons I picked this area was because there isn't an HOA telling everyone exactly what color their house has to be. Some homes are modern, some are ranch style. A few have bright colors. It gives the neighborhood actual personality. After saving for months, I finally decided to repaint my house. Instead of the boring beige it originally had, I chose a warm coral color with cream trim and dark green shutters. I absolutely loved how it turned out. Apparently, my neighbor Richard hated it. From the very first day painters showed up, he kept walking over to complain. First, it was the paint. Then, it was my front yard. Instead of perfectly trimmed grass, I planted California wildflowers, lavender, sunflowers, and a few native plants that attract butterflies. I also installed a little free library near the sidewalk and decorated the walkway with colorful stones my younger cousin had painted by hand. Richard called the entire thing an eyesore. Every single week, he'd find another reason to complain. Finally, I told him, if you want every house to look exactly the same, maybe you'd enjoy living somewhere with an HOA. That made him furious. I've lived here for 16 years, he snapped. I shouldn't have to move because of you. I laughed and replied, then I guess you'll have to get used to seeing some color. He wasn't amused. Last weekend, my cousin came over to help me finish the garden path. We placed painted stepping stones shaped like turtles, hummingbirds, ladybugs, and California poppies. She was incredibly proud of them. While we were working, Richard marched across the street yet again. He looked at the garden for about 5 seconds before saying, this neighborhood used to have standards. I finally lost my patience. I looked at him and said, maybe it's time you stop worrying about everyone else's property and find yourself a hobby. My cousin immediately burst out laughing. Richard's face turned bright red. You have no respect. I shrugged. You've been complaining for months. At some point, you have to move on. Without another word, he stormed back across the street, muttering something under his breath. The funny part? Most of my other neighbors actually stopped by later that afternoon just to compliment the garden. One family even asked where I bought the little free library because they wanted one too. Still, one neighbor later told me I probably should have been nicer because Richard has lived there forever. Maybe. But after months of constant complaints, I honestly think I'd already been nicer than most people would have been. All right, let's jump into the next one. I think my girlfriend has been secretly trying to get me fired from every job I've ever had. Yeah, that title is already insane. Here's the story. I'm a 25-year-old guy, and my now ex-girlfriend, Nicole, is 30. We were together for almost 3 years. When we first started dating, I had just graduated from college and was trying to build my resume. I wasn't chasing a dream job yet. I was simply working wherever I could gain experience. Over the last couple of years, I'd worked at a coffee shop in Los Angeles, a bookstore, a grocery store, a public library, and even tutored English online. One thing always kept happening. No matter where I worked, strange complaints would suddenly appear. Customers would leave detailed one-star reviews mentioning me by name. Anonymous emails would be sent to managers accusing me of things I'd never done. Someone even used employee Wi-Fi to search inappropriate websites under my login, which almost got me fired. Every single time, I somehow managed to explain myself, but eventually the stress became unbearable. I kept wondering, why does this keep happening? Nicole was always incredibly supportive. Whenever I came home upset, she'd comfort me. She'd tell me none of it was my fault. She'd remind me that eventually I'd find a better workplace. She became the one person keeping me sane. Fast forward to a couple months ago. I had started working part-time at a small artisan bakery in Santa Monica. Honestly, everything was going well. My coworkers liked me. Customers were friendly. Then one afternoon, my manager asked if she could speak with me privately. She showed me a brand new Google review. The review described one employee as rude, lazy, and disrespectful. Based on the shift schedule, that employee could only have been me. My stomach dropped. Not again. I explained everything that had happened at my previous jobs. Thankfully, my manager believed me. She said the review looked suspicious and promised she wouldn't hold it against me. During my lunch break, I searched for the review myself. The username looked fake, something like Mason Harper 89. Not obviously fake, just fake enough. I went home that evening and decided not to mention it to Nicole. I was tired of repeating the same story over and over. We had dinner, watched TV, everything seemed normal. Then she got up to grab something from the kitchen, leaving her phone on the coffee table. A notification appeared. Normally I would have ignored it, but one word caught my eye. Google. The notification said something like, Mason Harper 89, the business owner, has replied to your review. I froze. My heart immediately started racing. That username. It couldn't be a coincidence. For the next 2 days, I kept trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe someone borrowed her account. Maybe she had another explanation. Maybe anything. But nothing else made sense. Finally, I decided I needed proof. A few days later, I asked if I could borrow her laptop because I needed to book a train ticket to visit my dad in San Jose. She handed it over without hesitation. While she was getting ready for work, I logged into the travel website. Then curiosity got the better of me. I opened her email. Within minutes, I found something that completely changed my life. She had emailed herself a spreadsheet. At first, I assumed it was work-related. It wasn't. It was about me. Every job I'd ever worked, every manager's phone number, every coworker's social media profile, my passwords, my work schedules, email addresses, personal information, everything. There were even notes explaining which fake accounts she'd created to leave reviews or send complaints. Some columns were color-coded. Others had check marks showing which jobs she'd already handled. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. It honestly felt like something out of a psychological thriller. I immediately emailed the file to myself, took screenshots, printed copies, and packed everything I owned while she was at work. By the time she got home, I was already gone. I drove straight to my dad's house. The second I walked through his front door, I completely broke down. I couldn't stop shaking. For years, I'd blamed myself. I'd wondered why every workplace somehow turned against me the entire time. The person comforting me afterward had actually been creating the problems herself. My dad immediately contacted a lawyer, then the police, then helped me find a therapist because I honestly wasn't functioning anymore. I ended the relationship with one short text. "I know everything. Don't contact me again." She replied dozens of times. I never answered. Sometimes the scariest people aren't strangers. Sometimes they're the people sitting next to you every single day. A couple of years have passed since everything happened, so here's the final update. In the end, I never took Nicole to court. A lot of people thought I was making a huge mistake. Honestly, maybe they were right. But after everything I'd been through, the thought of sitting in a courtroom for months sounded worse than simply walking away. By that point, I barely slept. I'd lost weight. Every unknown phone call made my heart race. Even getting an email from work would send me into a panic because I expected another complaint waiting for me. My lawyer managed to negotiate everything privately. She agreed to stop contacting me completely. We signed the paperwork. That was it. I moved to another city, started over, found a stable full-time job, slowly rebuilt my confidence. Therapy helped more than I ever imagined it would. I still keep most of my social media private. I'm careful about what personal information I post online, but for the first time in years, I actually feel safe. Sometimes I still wonder why she did it. Was it control, jealousy, some kind of twisted way to make herself feel needed? I'll probably never know. And honestly, I don't think I want to. The important thing is that she's no longer part of my life. Stories like this almost sound fake because they're so extreme. But unfortunately, people like this really do exist. It's terrifying to realize someone you completely trusted was quietly sabotaging your life while pretending to support you. The biggest lesson here? If something feels completely impossible, don't ignore it just because it sounds unbelievable. Sometimes your instincts are trying to tell you something your brain doesn't want to accept. All right, let's move on before that story gives everyone trust issues. Today, I completely embarrassed myself during a company's Zoom meeting. I work remotely for a marketing company based in Irvine, California. Like most people who work from home, I absolutely hate sitting still during meetings. Whenever we have long video calls, I usually walk around the apartment, load the dishwasher, water my plants, or convince my dog to stop chewing things he's definitely not supposed to chew. Last Thursday, we had one of those quarterly company meetings. You know the type. 45 minutes of executives using buzzwords like growth, innovation, synergy, customer-first mindset. Half the meeting could have been an email. Anyway, cameras were off. Microphones were supposed to stay muted unless someone had a question. I put on my wireless earbuds and started cleaning my kitchen while listening. At one point, my golden retriever walked over carrying one of my sneakers. I looked at him and said, "Dude, seriously? You already have like 15 toys. Leave my shoes alone, you little goblin." He ignored me. Naturally. Then I accidentally knocked a spoon onto the tile floor. It made an incredibly loud crashing sound. I laughed to myself and said, "Well, that was graceful." Right as I finished talking, I heard silence, complete silence. Then my manager stopped mid-sentence. A few seconds later, someone asked, who's talking?" My heart stopped. I looked at the screen. Instead of seeing the mute icon, I saw my microphone glowing bright green. I hadn't been muted. For almost 5 minutes, everyone had heard me talking to my dog, the crashing dishes, everything. I muted myself so fast I nearly threw my laptop across the room. Then I pretended I needed a bathroom break and disappeared for several minutes just to recover from the embarrassment. Later that afternoon, my manager messaged me. I was convinced I was about to get written up. Instead, the message simply said, "Thanks for bringing some entertainment to today's meeting." Apparently, everyone thought it was hilarious. One coworker even admitted she'd been laughing so hard she had to turn off her camera afterward. Still, I don't think I'll ever trust the mute button again. Honestly, if you've worked remotely for long enough, you've probably had at least one close call like that. Maybe not quite that embarrassing, but close. Every single time I join a meeting now, I probably check whether I'm muted at least 15 times. I refuse to become that person again. All right, let's keep going. We've had enough workplace disasters. Time for another relationship story. This one starts off rough. Am I overreacting because my boyfriend made plans with his friends on my birthday? I'm 22 years old and my boyfriend, Ethan, is 23. We've been together for almost 3 years and have been talking about moving into an apartment together somewhere in Orange County later this year. Birthdays have always been a big deal to me, not because I expect expensive gifts, but because I love celebrating the people I care about. Every year for Ethan's birthday, I'd bake his favorite chocolate cake, buy thoughtful presents, and plan something fun for the two of us. Last year, he postponed celebrating my birthday because he said he was exhausted after work. It hurt a little, but I let it go. This year, my birthday landed on a Sunday. I reminded him several times throughout the week that we had dinner reservations. Everything seemed fine. Until Sunday afternoon. I texted him asking what time he wanted to pick me up. His response completely caught me off guard. "Oh, I forgot. I'm already heading to Newport Beach with the guys." I stared at my phone thinking it had to be a joke. It wasn't. He actually chose a last-minute beach trip with his friends over celebrating my birthday. I honestly thought he was kidding. So I called him. He answered almost immediately, but instead of apologizing, he sounded annoyed. "Can't we just celebrate tomorrow?" I reminded him that this wasn't just any birthday. It was my 22nd. I'd already bought a new dress. I'd made reservations weeks earlier. I'd been talking about it almost every day leading up to it. His response? "It's just a date on the calendar. We'll still celebrate. You need to stop making such a big deal out of everything." That hurt more than him forgetting. It wasn't the dinner. It wasn't the gifts. It was realizing I clearly cared much more about celebrating each other than he did. I spent that evening alone in my apartment. The restaurant reservation went unused. The dress stayed hanging in my closet. Around 11:30 that night, he finally texted me, "Happy birthday." That was it. No apology, no explanation, nothing. The next morning, he asked if I wanted to grab lunch instead, as if moving my birthday to Monday somehow fixed everything. When I told him I was upset, he actually asked why I was still stuck on yesterday. That's when I made my Reddit post. Almost everyone agreed on one thing. The birthday wasn't really the issue. The effort was. If someone genuinely cares about you, they usually don't accidentally make other plans on one of the few days each year that's important to you. A couple of days later, we finally met to talk. He apologized. Sort of. "I'm sorry you're upset." Not, "I'm sorry I hurt you." There's a huge difference. The conversation quickly turned into him explaining why I was overreacting. Apparently I was being dramatic. Apparently birthdays aren't important. Apparently I should have appreciated that he was still willing to celebrate later. At some point, I realized something. I wasn't trying to convince him my feelings mattered. I was trying to convince him they existed. And honestly, that shouldn't be necessary in a healthy relationship. So I ended things. It was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had. For nearly 3 years, I genuinely believed I'd marry him someday. Walking away hurt, but staying would have hurt even more. Sometimes people don't lose relationships because of one terrible decision. Sometimes they lose them because they refuse to understand why that decision mattered. I genuinely hope he's grown since then. Maybe he has. Maybe he hasn't. Either way, I learned something important. Never beg someone to make you a priority. If they want to, they will. All right, let's switch gears. Enough relationship drama. Here's a completely different one. I accidentally destroyed my friend's laptop. and she wanted me to buy her a better one. I hosted a game night at my apartment in Long Beach. One of my friends invited someone I'd never met before named Ashley. She brought her MacBook because she'd been working earlier that day. At some point, she left it sitting on my couch, without realizing it was there. I sat down. Crunch. The screen shattered instantly. I felt awful. It was obviously an accident, but it was still my fault. I apologized immediately and offered to replace the laptop. She told me she'd bought it about 3 years earlier for around $2,300. I agreed to reimburse her. A few days later, she emailed me asking for $2,900. Confused, I called her. She explained that she'd already been thinking about upgrading to a newer model anyway. Since I was paying, she expected me to cover the newer laptop instead. I honestly thought she was joking. She wasn't. When I refused, she threatened to sue me in small claims court. At first, I considered just paying because I hate conflict. But after talking to friends and reading a ridiculous amount of legal advice online, I decided to actually look up repair costs. Turns out, only the display had broken. Replacing the screen would have cost roughly $350, plus labor. So I withdrew my original offer. Instead, I offered to pay the full repair bill. She immediately called me cheap. Then, a week later, I actually got served with court papers. Yep, she really took me to court. When the hearing finally happened, I brought printed copies of every email we'd exchanged. I also brought repair estimates from multiple certified Apple repair shops. I explained to the judge that I'd originally offered to replace the entire laptop, but Ashley rejected that offer because she wanted me to finance an upgrade she had already planned to buy herself. The judge listened carefully, then asked Ashley why she'd left an expensive laptop sitting on someone else's couch. She didn't have much of an answer. In the end, the judge ruled that we were both partially responsible. I was ordered to pay half of the repair cost. Instead of nearly $3,000, I paid just over $200. Walking out of the courthouse, Ashley looked absolutely furious. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop smiling. Sometimes trying to take advantage of someone's kindness ends up costing you far more than simply accepting a fair solution in the first place. All right, let's jump into another one. My boyfriend quit gaming, and now he's miserable. My boyfriend Ryan is 29, and we've been together for almost 4 years. For as long as I've known him, gaming has been his biggest hobby. After work, he'd jump online with his friends, play for a couple of hours, and then we'd watch a movie before bed. Honestly, it never bothered me. He still made time for me, helped around the apartment, and never ignored his responsibilities. A few months ago, though, he decided he was wasting his life. He watched a bunch of self-improvement videos online that basically claimed video games were destroying men's motivation. The next day, he deleted every game from his PC, sold his PlayStation, canceled all his subscriptions. Just like that. At first, I thought it was admirable. He seemed excited. He kept saying things like, "This is the beginning of a new version of me." The problem? That excitement lasted maybe 3 days. Now every evening he just wanders around the apartment. He'll open the fridge, close it, sit on the couch, stand back up, scroll through his phone, throw it down after 2 minutes, then sigh loudly, every single night. I've suggested we go hiking. He says he's tired. I suggest going to the gym together. Too much effort. Maybe watch a movie. Nah, try cooking something new. Maybe another time. It's like he removed the one thing he enjoyed without replacing it with anything else. Now he seems irritated all the time. Little things that never used to bother him suddenly make him angry. Traffic, laundry, the Wi-Fi being slow. Even deciding what to order for dinner somehow turns into a stressful event. I don't know how to help him anymore. Has anyone else gone through something like this? Honestly, I think this happens more often than people realize. Whether it's gaming, social media, sports, or any other hobby, if something takes up a huge part of your daily routine, you can't just remove it. You need to replace it. Otherwise, all you've really created is empty time. And empty time usually turns into boredom. Boredom turns into frustration. Frustration eventually gets aimed at the people around you. Gaming wasn't necessarily the problem. The lack of balance probably was. If he really wants to stop playing games, that's completely fine. But he needs something else to get excited about. Maybe learning guitar, joining a basketball league, photography, surfing, rock climbing, literally anything that gives him goals to work toward. Otherwise, he's just sitting around thinking about what he isn't doing anymore. All right. Speaking of relationships, here's another one. My best friend confessed his love for me. 2 days before my wedding. I've been with my fiancé, Daniel, for almost 4 years. We're both in our early 30s, and our wedding was only 48 hours away. My best friend Chris and I have known each other since our freshman year at UCLA. We've always been close. He eventually became friends with Daniel, too. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Then one morning, I woke up to a text message that was several pages long. Chris admitted he'd been in love with me for years. He said he'd spent all this time secretly hoping Daniel and I would eventually break up. Then came the sentence that completely shocked me. Call off the wedding. Run away with me. I stared at my phone for almost 10 minutes. I honestly couldn't believe what I was reading. There was never anything romantic between us. Not once. I'd never flirted with him, never led him on, never crossed any boundaries. To me, he was family. What hurt the most wasn't even the confession. It was realizing he'd apparently spent years pretending to be okay while secretly waiting for my relationship to fail. I felt sick. And honestly, pretty angry. If he'd told me years earlier, maybe we could have dealt with it then. Instead, he waited until 2 days before my wedding. What exactly was I supposed to do? Cancel everything? Tell hundreds of guests to go home because of one text message? I didn't even know how to respond. The first thing I did was wait until Daniel came home. Then I handed him my phone. He silently read every single message. I watched his face go from confused to shocked to disappointed. When he finished reading, I immediately started apologizing. He stopped me. You didn't do anything wrong. Then he asked me one simple question. What do you want to do? I thought about it for a long time. Finally, I answered. I don't think he should come to the wedding. Daniel nodded. I agree. Together, we sent one short message. I'm sorry you misunderstood our friendship. The wedding is still happening, but we think it's best if you don't attend. Then we waited. About an hour later, Chris replied. And somehow, his response was even worse than the first message. His reply was enormous. At first, I hoped he was just embarrassed and wanted to apologize. I couldn't have been more wrong. He accused me of leading him on for years. He claimed every coffee we'd ever had together, every birthday gift, every late-night conversation somehow meant I secretly loved him. Then the messages became cruel. He said he hoped Daniel would leave me someday. He hoped our marriage would fail. He even said he hoped we'd never be able to have children. Reading that completely broke me. I started crying. Daniel quietly took my phone, walked into another room, and blocked Chris on every platform before I even had to ask. My maid of honor and Daniel's best man handled the guest list, so I wouldn't have to worry about whether Chris would show up. Thankfully, he never did. Our wedding turned out to be everything we'd hoped for. The ceremony was beautiful. The reception was incredible. Looking back, I barely even think about Chris anymore. What I do think about is how grateful I am that Daniel handled everything with patience instead of jealousy. Instead of blaming me, he stood beside me. That's exactly what marriage should look like. Sometimes losing someone you thought was your best friend hurts, but realizing they were never actually the friend you believed they were hurts even more. All right, let's lighten things up a little. Parents got mad because I gave their kids too much sugar at my son's birthday party. Last weekend, we celebrated my 6-year-old son's birthday at a park in Irvine. Nothing fancy, just balloons, pizza, cupcakes, cookies, juice boxes, candy, and a cooler full of drinks. Pretty standard birthday party stuff. Here's what surprised me. Almost every parent simply dropped their child off and drove away. Some didn't even introduce themselves. They just said, "We'll be back in a couple of hours." Okay, fine. I don't mind watching kids. But if you're leaving your child with me, I'm going to assume you trust me to make reasonable decisions. Everything went great. The kids played soccer, ran around the playground, opened presents, ate cake, some grabbed cookies, a few wanted soda. Nothing seemed unusual. The next morning, however, I started getting text messages. One parent complained that her son had too much candy. Another said her daughter came home completely wired after drinking cola. Someone even called me irresponsible for allowing children to choose what they wanted. Here's the thing. Every kid who grabbed a soda told me they were allowed to drink it. None of the parents mentioned dietary restrictions, no allergies, no rules about sugar, nothing. If someone had simply said, "Please don't let Emma drink soda," of course I would have respected that. But nobody said a word. Now they're acting like I was somehow supposed to magically know every family's rules. Personally, I don't think that's fair. If you're leaving your child with another adult for several hours, it's your responsibility to explain any important restrictions beforehand. Otherwise, you're expecting people to read your mind. All right. One last subscriber story before we wrap things up. Am I lazy? Or is something actually wrong? I'm a 16-year-old girl. For as long as I can remember, teachers have always said the same thing during parent conferences. She's bright. She understands the material. But she struggles to stay focused. When I was younger, everyone laughed it off. I talked too much, forgot homework, lost pencils, started projects and never finished them. People just called me scatterbrained. My parents both have ADHD. My younger brother was diagnosed a few years ago. Lately, I've started wondering if maybe I should be evaluated too. This past school year was incredibly difficult. I studied harder than ever before, spent hours in the library, stayed up late preparing for exams, yet somehow I'd sit down to study and realize 30 minutes later I'd been staring at the same page without actually reading it. My teachers even suggested talking to a counselor about getting extra academic support. When my parents received the email, they dismissed it immediately. "You don't have ADHD. You're just lazy. Stop looking for excuses." Eventually, I failed one of my finals. When I tried explaining how hard I'd actually been working, they interrupted me before I could finish. That night, I completely broke down. Not because of the grade, because I honestly couldn't tell anymore whether I was actually lazy or whether something else was making everything feel so much harder than it seemed for everyone around me. First of all, no, you're not lazy simply because you're struggling. Nobody on the internet, including me, can diagnose you. That's something only a qualified professional can do. But I will say this. People who are genuinely lazy usually aren't staying up until 2 in the morning trying desperately to succeed. They aren't crying because they care so much. The fact that you're working incredibly hard already tells me something important. You care. A lot. If multiple teachers independently suggested getting evaluated, that's worth taking seriously. Maybe it's ADHD, maybe it isn't. Either way. You deserve answers instead of being dismissed. Asking for help isn't weakness, it's responsibility. Hopefully your parents eventually understand that. All right, we've got one more subscriber story before we wrap things up. I still can't move on from my ex, even though we broke up months ago. I'm 20 years old, and my ex-girlfriend, Emily, is 18. We broke up about 6 months ago, and no matter how hard I try, I just can't seem to move on. I've dated other people before, but this relationship was different. When we were together, everything just felt easy. We could sit in the car for hours talking about absolutely nothing. We'd grab burgers after class, drive along the Pacific Coast Highway, and dream about what our lives would look like in 5 or 10 years. For the first time in my life, I genuinely thought I'd found the person I wanted to spend forever with. The biggest problem wasn't our relationship. It was her dad. He was incredibly strict. He barely let her go anywhere. He didn't even know we were dating because she was terrified of how he'd react. Most of the time, we'd only see each other for 30 or 40 minutes between my shifts at work and her college classes. Whenever her dad traveled for business, we'd finally get the chance to go on a real date. Looking back, it wasn't ideal, but I thought she was worth every inconvenience. Her mom knew about us. She lived separately after divorcing Emily's father, and she actually liked me a lot. She always told Emily that I treated her well. That made me believe we'd eventually figure everything out. Then one afternoon, she asked if we could meet. The moment I saw her face, I knew something was wrong. She quietly told me she couldn't do it anymore. Keeping our relationship secret was making her feel guilty. She loved her family, and she hated lying to them every single day. I tried convincing her that we could talk to her dad together. She shook her head. He'll never accept it. So, we broke up. Not because we stopped loving each other, because life got in the way. A month later, I brought flowers to her campus, hoping maybe we'd talk everything through. Instead, she politely thanked me and said her decision hadn't changed. Ever since then, I've been completely stuck. I go to work, come home, think about her, go to sleep, wake up, repeat. I've tried meeting other people. It never feels right. Part of me wants to contact her mom because she always supported us. The other part of me knows that would probably cross a line. I honestly don't know what to do anymore. Man, this one hurts. Not every breakup happens because someone cheated, or lied, or stopped caring. Sometimes two people genuinely love each other, but the timing just isn't right. That said, I don't think chasing her is the answer. She's already made her decision. The healthiest thing you can do right now is focus on yourself. Keep working. Spend time with friends. Find hobbies that make you happy again. Who knows? Maybe a couple of years from now your paths cross again. Maybe they don't. But if you spend the next several years waiting for someone who's asked for space, you'll only end up putting your own life on pause. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is nothing. All right. One last story. My boyfriend keeps acting like I'm hiding something whenever I spend time with friends. I'm a 23-year-old woman, and my boyfriend, Jake, is 22. We've been together for almost 3 years. A few months ago, we moved into an apartment together in Costa Mesa. Lately, I've been reconnecting with some old friends from high school. Nothing unusual. We'll grab coffee, go to the beach, watch movies, pretty normal stuff. But ever since I started seeing them again, Jake's attitude has completely changed. He never directly accuses me of cheating. Instead, he makes little comments. Things like, people only act that secretive when they're hiding something. Or, I wonder what you're really doing when you're out. Whenever I ask what he means, he immediately says, relax, I'm joking. Except, it never feels like a joke. On top of that, his mood changes constantly. Some days, he's incredibly affectionate. He hugs me, tells me he loves me, plans date nights. Then, without warning, he'll spend an entire evening barely speaking to me. If I ask what's wrong, I'm fine. Always. I'm just tired. Eventually, I stopped asking. The hardest part is that I constantly feel like I've done something wrong. Then, a day later, everything suddenly goes back to normal, like nothing happened. I've tried talking to him several times. He apologizes, promises he'll do better. But nothing actually changes. I'm starting to feel emotionally exhausted. Am I overthinking this? Personally, I don't think you are. Healthy relationships are built on communication. If someone repeatedly tells you everything is fine while treating you completely differently, eventually you're going to stop trusting their words. Actions matter more than apologies. If the same behavior keeps happening over and over, then the apology isn't solving anything. My advice would simply be to have one honest conversation, not during an argument, not after one of his comments, just a calm conversation. Explain how his behavior makes you feel. If he's willing to listen and actually work on it, that's a great sign. If he immediately becomes defensive or dismisses your feelings, that tells you something too. Always trust consistent behavior more than temporary promises. And that's going to be it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed today's Reddit stories as much as I did. I'd love to know which story stood out to you the most, so let me know down in the comments. I always enjoy reading what everyone thinks, especially when people completely disagree with each other. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more Reddit stories mixed with relaxing gameplay. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate you spending part of your day here. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.